Let's take the fourth one. Corporate crime, fraud, and abuse, a subject that only recently has been studied in law schools. Okay? You've read all about it. It's in the business pages. It's on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, 60 Minutes, Washington Post, Seattle paper, corporate crime against consumers and investors and Wall Street crooks and Enron and WorldCom and so on. Okay? Most of the people, I would say over 90%, want a crackdown on corporate crime, fraud, and abuse. It's looted trillions of dollars, drained trillions of dollars in worker pension funds, mutual funds, small investors, laid off lots of workers. There are no workers anymore for WorldCom and Enron. Those companies have disappeared under the brunt of the corporate criminals who ran them. So who says no to increasing budgets, to put more federal cops on the corporate crime beat, to toughen penalties, to upgrade these antiquated criminal laws dealing with business crime? Obviously, it's the corporate criminals and their trade associations in Washington. Now, the corporations who are fighting tougher law enforcement, they have no vote. They're not human beings. And yet they win again and again against the people they're looting, harming through environmental crimes, occupational disease exposures that are illegal, and all kinds of rip-offs of you as a consumer. No democracy in this area of our society. Let's take pollution. Poll after poll shows when the question is asked, are you willing to pay more to reduce pollution of the air, water, in the food? People say yes, between 85 and 90%. Even though, in many instances, they shouldn't have to pay more. You shouldn't have to pay more to be more efficient in your motor vehicle internal combustion engine, which would reduce pollution and greenhouse gases. You shouldn't have to pay more because environmental technology requires a greater efficiency and productivity in the use of natural resources like coal, gas, oil, etc. But just to handicap the poll, still over 80% of the people say we want less pollution in our lives, in our food, in our air, in our water, in our children's bodies. We want less lead in our bodies, less asbestos in our bodies. We want a reduction in asthma among children, especially minority children, okay? Who says no? The polluting companies. They say to Congress and the state legislatures, we don't want tougher standards. The corporations don't have a vote. We have the vote. A majority of people want it. We lose. They win. We die. They win. We spend money on health care because of the diseases. They laugh all the way to the bank because the more wasteful they can give you energy technologies with, the more money they make. I mean, if they have inefficient air conditioning, heating systems, electricity companies sell more electricity. Inefficient motor vehicles, in terms of fuel, they sell you more gasoline. They win, the people lose. No democracy in this area. You can see by now I'm trying to dispel some of the myths we grow up in our educational background. Huh? Okay. Now, when it comes to elections, the corporations say money is speech, and the Supreme Court agrees. Corporations have no vote. They get their executives. They get PACs. In some areas at the state level, they can give money directly. And the people want public funding of public campaigns. They may not want to pay for it, some of them, but you can do it with a voluntary checkoff on the 1040 tax return, well promoted, say up to $300 per person if a person wants it, doesn't have to give anything, and a certain amount of free time on our public airwaves for ballot qualified candidates. The corporations say no, the corporations have no vote, the people say yes, the people have the vote. Year after year, our political institutions side with the corporations, our political major parties side with the corporations. No democracy. NAFTA and WTO, the people were against this from the get-go. They smelled something funny, even though the press was largely for NAFTA and WTO, even though Clinton was for it. He's the one who got it through, both of them. Now, what are NAFTA and WTO? They're called trade agreements. But what they really are coercive systems of transnational governance. We got to obey them when we sign on. They're federal law. And these are not just trade agreements dealing with quotas and tariffs. No, they subordinate worker, environmental, and consumer rights to the imperatives and domination of international commerce. Just think of that. Every time our country's progressed, it's progressed in social justice by telling corporations that their commercial priorities must be subordinated to the abolition of child labor. They should go to school, hire the parents, to the imposition of consumer laws, protection laws, and environmental laws, and worker safety laws, and the right to form trade unions. This new regime of corporate globalization, always use the word corporate globalization. We got to use the right words here. Anytime you read in the papers about detainees being imprisoned for 4 or 5 years, no, they're not detainees. They're prisoners. Let's get rid of these euphemisms. Corporate globalization, in effect, reverses that trajectory where we subordinate commercial values to civic values, to the supremacy of civic values. In effect, it subordinates civic values, worker, consumer, environment, access to justice, access to the courts, to the imperative of international commerce. And who are the administrators? Who are the enforcers of WTO and NAFTA? I dare you to point one out by name. We don't elect them. No one in the world elects them. They're appointed by the bureaucracy of WTO and NAFTA. They're trade judges. They operate in tribunals, otherwise known as courts, to resolve disputes when countries in the lesser developed world challenge our higher protections for labor, consumer, environment, and say, oh, these standards are blocking exports from these countries to the U.S. Food labeling standards that make it hard for Brazil to send their food here. They don't want to meet the food labeling standards, let's say. 5 environmental standards were challenged by third world countries. We've lost all 5 in these tribunals in Geneva under the WTO. Well, guess what? I just talked to a Seattle reporter for your paper. He asked me about it. I said to him, you know, if you were sent to cover those tribunals in Geneva, if it involved, say, lumber or aircraft, just to pick 2 subjects at random, they wouldn't let you in the door. These are closed kangaroo courts. Reporters not in, and citizens not in. You can walk into a courtroom in this country. Nobody's going to say, it's closed to you. The trade judges have no conflicts of interest. There's no independent appeal from the decision, and it's enforceable by sanctions. If we didn't change our environmental regulations to conform to a lower standard or eliminate them, we would be fined under WTO. The fine would go to the country that challenged us in perpetuity until we complied with that rule. Furthermore, these trade agreements are pull-down agreements. They're called harmonization provisions, so that we would never have been able to get you airbags before if WTO was operating. We have to go to these international harmonization committees, which are lowest common denominator, and they happen to be secret too. So they violate our standards of freedom of information, open secrecy, access to open courts, independent appeals, see what the evidence is, and guess what? The trade judges, if they disagree, they don't write a dissent. You think this would be infuriating the law schools? The students would be researching, challenging, agitating. Are you kidding? These law schools are basically high-priced trade schools, producing lawyers who, if they're not careful, at a young age, will just become strategic cogs in the multinational corporate juggernaut, destroying democracy, destroying civic challenges, destroying the rule of law, except where they create the rule of law just for themselves as an instrument of oppression.